Megan Kaufman wrote an article on gender divisions in clubs at Utrecht, unintentionally sparking reactions from clubs that felt they had been unfairly portrayed as exclusive or even sexist. As a member of the Puma press, I won't speak to our ability to accurately portray facts. However, the reactions to Megan's article were not at all what we had hoped for. Whereas the article had been trying to point out that certain school clubs had clear imbalances of gender, the reaction became about why such a gender divide was even a problem, accusing the article of drawing up controversy where none had existed. GameCube Club, which I'm a founding member of, was featured prominently in the article, as were many other clubs composed of mostly one gender. But GameCube Club, I'm sad to say, was unique in its reaction to the article. Members viewed the article with near universal derision, becoming defensive as though the article were calling into question the legitimacy of the club, or even its right to exist. What's unfortunate is that gaming communities everywhere are notorious for reacting in such a way when confronted with issues of gender and sexuality in gaming. Here we've got a couple classic examples of sex symbols in gaming, with Maya Shiranui as old fighting game character, and Laura Croft, who sort of evolved as a sex symbol with the trade. So we've got several ridiculous examples throughout the generations. Another example I'd like to bring up is in World of Warcraft and other MMOs, massively multiplayer online games. Now here we have two identical items being worn by a male and a female, but as you can see, they don't seem to fit quite the same. You can see that the message being sent here is that women need to be objectified to get to the same level as men. Maybe show a little more skin, which I think is unfortunate. There's a common misconception that question gaming's attitudes towards gender and sexuality is to question the legitimacy of the medium as a whole. This reaction actually makes quite a bit of sense considering the way video games are marginalized by the mainstream media in general, and the way that they are used as scapegoats by politicians to explain violent youth culture and school shootings. I have a video from Fox and Friends during Bounds discussion. The sound is muted out there.
Is in Fallujah. For a fair and balanced discussion, I'm joined by the game developer, Peter Tempty, Captain Reid Omahundro, and he led a marine company in Fallujah and lost 13 men there. He's now an advisor on the game, and Tracy Miller, who's against the game because she lost her son in that battle. So why make it into a game?
Well, you know, about half or so, only half or so of the young adults that we've surveyed are familiar with the battle for Fallujah. And here we have one of the most historic battles in the history of the country, and most young adults aren't familiar with it.
Captain, are you actually saying, because I know you advise on this project, but are you actually going to say that this is a way to honor the men who died that day?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a way to honor the men that died that day. You know, it's more of an honor for the people that fought there.
I think I read somewhere in the notes that you lost your funding to actually put this game out to the public. Is that true?
Yeah, no, that's true.
Obviously, you knew, though, that you might get some blowback on it because some people lost their children in that battle. Peter Tempty, Captain Omahundro, and Tracy Miller, I'm unfortunately out of time this morning.
All right, so whatever your opinions on that particular interview were, it was clearly not as fair and balanced as advertised. Sadly, this is the only context that most of the world has seen video games in. To quote James Portnow, writer and video game designer, actual editor of that YouTube video, video games are judged by the name of their medium, not the merits of their work. When people see a game pushing the limits of what's been seen before, they don't see a team of artists honing their craft. They see a bunch of toy makers gone too far, like a branch of Mattel gone rogue. Now, the evolution of video game culture hasn't deviated dramatically from histories of other more universally appreciated media, such as new styles of dance, music, movies, and even at one time, books. When these art forms were relatively new and not yet universally appreciated, to the extent they are now, of course, each of them had to face controversy and persecution, and certain patterns have begun to form in the ways that each of them have developed under that scrutiny. While each started with very small, isolated audiences and even fewer producers who, without set criteria for excellence in their young media, they were able to experiment without risk to their careers. But as their audiences grew, the mediums began to appear more and more viable for supporting producers as dedicated professionals, such as respected movie makers, authors, and painters. At this point, the risks taken by producers need to be more and more calculated so as not to jeopardize their careers. Here, each media reached an innovation plateau where producers and their audience have reached a static, codependent relationship, where both parties understand what they want from the other, and deviation becomes unnecessary and dangerous. At this point, innovation only becomes probable again once the audience begins seeking it out. The producers begin to accommodate for that interest and change. But their ability to accommodate that interest is dependent upon the financial risks involved. In that sense, innovation is always the riskier and less profitable strategy. Now, different media have progressed through that stage in their lives with different speeds. The rule of thumb being that less expensive media is easier to evolve. And this is the real reason why video games have such a poor history with dealing with diversity of any kind. Because in addition to having a relatively small audience compared to other media, they are also extremely expensive to produce for large audiences. This phenomenon is called spectacle creep, where in order to stay relevant, competing games are made to create the biggest spectacle possible, always incorporating the most cutting-edge technology. Video games, more than any other medium in history, have become chained in place by sheer production costs. But it is my belief that the medium of video games extended stay in this innovation plateau that has allowed the negative image of gaming culture portrayed by the mainstream media to survive. What's more problematic, though, is not only does this lack of innovation allow negative stereotypes of gaming culture to thrive, it also allows for something known as the echo chamber effect. Thank you. Whereas each medium began as a pure expression by producers who didn't necessarily have audiences to react to, evolved into conversations between producers and their audiences. In an echo chamber, both parties assume complete understanding of the other, and in this state, producers project to the largest possible audience with the intention of solidifying that group's identity, and then using that audience's qualities stereotypically considered, held in that by that group to market their medium. This is the real reason GameCube Club and so many other gaming communities have the gender divides they do. Mainstream console games are being intentionally tailor-made to appeal to what investors believe is the most average teenage male. Rather than being challenged or confronted, the insecurities, phobias, and even subjects of pride associated with teenage male demographics are celebrated as what defines our community. Objectification of women, xenophobia, trash talk, and hyperviolence, while not subjects unfit for any medium, are encouraged by the video game industry. But economics is no reason to permit sexism, racism, and homophobia in any context. While video games are unique in their power to allow us to step into another's place, interact with another world, they are instead being used to create a space where our social fears and prejudices are to be celebrated and accepted as the norm. It's no wonder the industry suffers from such massive divides of socioeconomic class, gender, race, and sexuality, when all the world's groups are held to the standards of upper middle class white male teenagers. But video games aren't the first medium to encounter this problem. The mainstream movie industry, actually, when faced with almost the exact same problem, evolved to work around this echo chamber effect. At the advent of high-definition, computer-generated images and three-dimensional movies, Movies became too expensive for independent producers to profit from reliably, and only major film studios like Sony Pictures, NBC Universal, Fox Entertainment, and Paramount were able to produce these popular mainstream movies, which were the most profitable and the defining force in the movie industry. However, each of these branches began opening indie film branches, devoted to finding and funding independent filmmakers and helping make their movies, so that the risk of bankruptcy is lowered for both parties, and people still are able to take creative risks with their work. Subdivisions like Sony Pictures Classics, Focus Features, Fox Searchlight are responsible for some of the most economic movies of our time, and their parent companies are still able to take over. Steam, the world's largest video game market, has already begun to follow this trend, opening Steam Greenlight, where independent video game designers can have their ideas crowdsourced to establish an audience before deciding to take a serious investment in game. Interestingly enough, the flourishing independent gaming industry has moved straight through this innovation plateau, with almost no innovation whatsoever. And it is only the larger budget companies, the most visible ones that mainstream media can see, that have failed to incorporate any kind of diversity in their business models. And sadly, it is these companies that hold the most sway in the video game industry. Some would argue that until we can detach economic incentives from the video game publishing system, this innovation plateau will continue. But recognizing untapped audiences is an economic strategy in its own right. The success that independent game developers have had in new game demographics can only be followed by larger investors. And as video games eventually rise to the status of books, music, movies, their content will begin to reflect a more diverse audience. So it is my belief that one day this unique and powerful medium can have the same meaning to everyone that it has had for me and others